Joining us live now, the National Senator Matt Canavan. The gas conversation, it's pretty much where it was since we last spoke last week, Matt. So just remind our viewers what you think the answer should be that the Labor government currently is considering.
Well, look here, Peter. We've been calling for months for the government to use the domestic security gas mechanism which we had, which makes gas producers here in Australia to supply Australian gas first. Finally, they have reached some form of agreement, but it's not clear exactly what that is. Look, I think a lot could be done here if just the Resources Minister, Madeleine King, got out from under a rock and made it very clear what she expected. And we hardly ever hear from her. I don't think the gas companies are in any way feel threatened by her. And there should be an obligation on Australian gas companies to supply Australians first, to look after our country. Now, hopefully we don't need to resort to the blunt instrument of price caps or even a retrospective reservation scheme, both of which would just harm investment in the long term, because we have a real long-term supply issue in Australia. But I just think it would be better if we had a stronger resources minister at the moment. Madeleine King just seems to be hiding from this crisis in plain sight.
Well, I mean, we just heard her talk then about a reservation policy on the East Coast when it comes to putting one in retrospectively. She says it's too complex. Is that about right?
Well, look, there's no doubt things are difficult because we're trying to fix a situation that was stuffed up about a decade ago. We should have had a reservation policy then, and I don't.
Right, so on that note, did WA play a blinder?
Got it wrong. They did. And when I was Resources Minister, we changed our policy such that any new gas fields would be subject to a reservation policy. I think everybody accepts now that WA had it right. Doing it retrospectively is much more complex because, of course, people have made investments, and they've made investments on certain rules. And if we change those rules mid-game, well, we might not get those investments in the future. And as I say, we need that extra supply. But what I think should happen here is the government gets a little bit of its hands dirty, gets involved with the negotiations and contracts here, as I say, to apply appropriate pressure to get reasonable outcomes for Australian manufacturers. I think we're in an environment where deals can be done because, unlike when I was Resources Minister a few years ago, the price that gas companies are getting for overseas supply is so much more than here domestically. And so there is a middle ground here where Australian suppliers can get a reasonable price for gas producers can get a reasonable return on their investments, and we can keep our manufacturing industry here in Australia. But overall, we've also got to get past this phobia against fossil fuels. How can we have a government who's saying they want net zero emissions and they want to shut down the gas industry, but they're desperately saying we need gas now? Sure. That doesn't add up. If you're going to say you're going to kill an industry, they're hardly going to go to great lengths to help you out today.
Okay, so what is the short-term fix? I mean, the reporting suggests that the government, and Matt Thistlethwaite in the program a short time ago, he says that there will be an answer within weeks. There's more pressure for the government to have something in place by January the 1st. Which is a bit different from the budget a short time ago, which seemed to sidestep this whole issue. So they're looking at changes now. But what is the best short-term fix in your view?
Look, it's difficult to come to those conclusions without being in the room. I think, as I say, the Australian government has to get its hands dirty here and help negotiate these outcomes. I can't sit here and go through all the terms and conditions, but this last week's budget's been a total flop. It didn't have any answers to the household energy crisis that's facing Australians. As I say, it's time for the Australian government to do what they're elected to do and deliver on their promises.
So was that heads of agreement? Was that a flop as well?
Look, I think that'll be important next year. That doesn't kick into next year. The key thing here is making sure that's adhered to. That's if the reports are to be believed, that's about an extra 150 petajoules of gas. That's about a quarter of Australia's eastern demand for gas. So that's a lot. That's a lot of gas. And so as long as that's adhered to, that will make some difference. I think the issue here is, though, is giving long-term confidence to both the gas industry and gas consumers, because that will provide gas for next year. But people need to make business plans over many years, not just 1 year. And that's where the Australian government could do much more to say they actually support gas. They want to see gas production rise in this country. As I say, while you're trying to kill an industry tomorrow, they're hardly going to supply you that product today.
Okay, what do you make about... I mean, I was looking at this expert online last night, and he believed that a mandatory code of conduct is not going to work. Price caps are not going to work because it just suppresses initiatives to electrify, etc. But he made the point that you could tax the extra gas profits and use that revenue to then support businesses and households. So again, back to that point of taxing the extra gas profits. Has he got a point there?
There's a couple of problems with that. Number one, again, I think that will hurt investment incentives long term. If we muck around with tax settings in regards to these investments, we're just not going to get the extra investment we need to fill the clear supply gaps we've got over the next 10 years. So we'll be robbing Peter to pay Paul if we do that. We'll just be guaranteeing gas shortages in the future. The other issue is, look, there's clear questions over whether that would be consistent with our World Trade Organisation obligations. So we were very careful to make sure we did everything within the law, and I'm sure the government's getting similar advice.
Okay.